Hello and welcome to the April 11th edition of This Week in South Carolina in Session. I'm Gavin Jackson outside the State House here in Columbia. Well, it continues to be Senate Budget Week up here at the State House, with the Senate continuing to debate the budget for the third day in the row up here. We do get to see senators on the Senate floor add amendments to the budget, and that's what they're doing right now. They want to kind of change the budget. They want to add provisos for things that they think are important. And in some cases, these are adopted. In some other cases, they become contentious and get voted down. Like we saw Republican from Anderson County, Senator Richard Cash today, trying to basically make it illegal for outlaw rather any state employee on the state health care plan to have an abortion for incest or rape. Now, he has been a big proponent of the personhood bill, which has gone nowhere this year. It's on the Senate floor, but since it's past crossover now, that bill's pretty much dead for the year. So this is kind of a last-minute attempt for him to try and get some sort of victory for his base and for his main legislative agenda, which is anti-abortion. So we did get to see some of that activity on the Senate floor today. That didn't go anywhere, got voted down. But it's one of the many ways that senators try to amend the budget to push their legislative agendas. We also have seen some contentious debates surrounding Santee Cooper, the state-owned utility that's part of that VC summer nuclear debacle with SE&G. Senator Tom Davis had an amendment looking to create a study committee to look at Santee Cooper and its viability going forward and any potential ability for it to be sold in the future. This drew some heated debate with Senator Larry Grooms over that amendment, which was later adopted after it was slightly changed. Now, this is an interesting amendment because we saw over in the House last week lawmakers push through a bill that would effectively create their own committee to look at the sale of Santee Cooper and to vet it and to further study Santee Cooper, because right now all we've really seen is the governor talking about selling Santee Cooper, no real study into the matter. So a lot of moving parts going on with the $8.2 billion budget, which is still under debate right now in the Senate. So I didn't really put together a clip of what happened on the Senate floor today because things are still in flux, but rather I put together a supercut of the Senate Finance Committee subcommittee chairman talking about different aspects of the budget. We're talking about the numbers of this budget. We're looking at potential pay raises for teachers, pay raises for corrections officers, additional school buses being bought with the money in this year's budget, and a variety of other things. Even additional money for for teachers and on the front lines dealing with autism. Several different aspects are included in funding for this budget, as well as increased funding for students in education, K through 12 education, and some additional money for higher ed maintenance needs. So take a minute to listen to some of these subcommittee chairmen talk about the funding priorities that have been incorporated into the $8.2 billion budget right now that's on the Senate floor.
To fund $17.2 million to buy about 200 new buses. So if we have 500 of these buses on the road today. If you remember these buses, we have 500 of those on the road today. But if you add the funding that by overriding the governor's veto, we had the funding last year to purchase 300 buses, and then this year purchases 200 buses for a total of a little over 500 buses that will take these off the road. The House budget provided zero recurring funding for 32 of the 33 public colleges and universities. That's right, zero recurring dollars for 32 of the 33 institutions of higher learning. The finance budget corrects that and provides what I believe to be fair funding for all 33 colleges, totaling $20 million statewide. This is one of the most substantial infusions of recurring dollars into state-based budgets in years. Also funded $4 million in school facility safety equipment and infrastructure that through a grant funding through the Department of Education.
Number one, the K through 12 budget proposal gives public school teachers in South Carolina a 1% pay raise funded through the EIA. It increases the starting salary of teachers, the minimum starting salary of teachers, which is now $30,000 to $32,000. Number three, and this is an important difference from the House, the Senate Education Committee, K through 12 Education Committee, proposes adding $60 to the EFA, the base student cost. We, in the K-12, added $3 million recurring for school buses and $5 million in a non-recurring source. And Senator Peeler also already talked with you about bus funding from the lottery. These combined sources will indeed take the fire buses off the road and begin to make a further dent in the backlog that we have in replacing buses. And this budget adds $13.1 million to fund all the charter schools that are in the charter school world in South Carolina.
I want to start off with the Department of Health and Human Services. The Medicaid annualization has been funded, allowing the agency to continue to maintain payments for services. And also, this allows them to continue to provide some funding for the free clinics, for the federally health care centers, and capital improvements at the local alcohol and drug facilities throughout the state of South Carolina. Additional funding has also been provided for the Rural Health Initiative, with HHS partnering with the research universities to develop a long-term plan for addressing our medically underserved communities in rural areas and to develop medical education through rural residency placements and infrastructure improvements across the state of South Carolina. The subcommittee's top priorities for this year: autism therapy rates and services provided additional funds above the agency's request for a rate increase for the line therapists. That's those that are on the front line providing these therapies to critical services to the children in South Carolina. The additional funding will provide an increased rate to $31 per hour. This is almost an 80% increase over the current rate for those individuals that are providing those frontline therapy services. At the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs, funding is included to increase the starting salaries for direct care staff and provide a retention increase for direct care employees working for at least 5 years.
And the Finance Committee also approved $8 million for the State Election Commission to match federal Help America Vote Act, voting systems upgrades, and critical security measures for our voting machines. These funds will be used to procure a new system and ensure our existing system remains secure, reliable, and verifiable.
We funded Real ID this year. It was the second year. If you remember, Real ID cost was about $25 million. Last year, we'd give them about $6 million plus allow them to do a carry forward. So they had about $13 million. This is the second part of that. This will provide for additional customer service representatives and some weekend openings of those offices. And so we hope that next year we will be able to complete that process.
Second, the subcommittee recommends stronger funding support for salary increases, overtime pay, retention increases, and additional personnel for SLED, Department of Public Safety, the Criminal Justice Academy, and the Administrative Law Court. $1.3 million in recurring funding to provide the law enforcement rank change increases for eligible law enforcement personnel and to hire additional forensic scientists and technicians to address backlogs and increasing case loads resulting from the agency's processing of all toxicology and most DNA cases statewide, an ever-growing need. Department of Public Safety, $2 million recurring funding for DPS trooper overtime pay. For the current fiscal year, DPS depleted its carry-forward cash balances to pay existing troopers overtime when earned instead of requiring them to take compensatory time to be used or paid at a later date. This funding provided will provide a stable recurring appropriation to support the continuation of paying overtime hours, which are critical during natural disasters, protests, special events, and times of increased assistance calls. Under the Judicial Department, there is an increase of $7 million in non-recurring funds for implementation of the first 2 phases of the Judicial Department's Case Management Modernization Plan. $5.5 million for correctional officer pay increases at the Department of Corrections and the Department of Juvenile Justice. In an effort to reduce officer shortages, Officers at the Department of Corrections will receive a $1,000 salary increase, and new officers with no experience will now earn a starting salary of just over $32,000 per year. At the Department of Juvenile Justice, officers and community specialists will receive a $500 salary increase, and new officers with no experience will now earn a starting salary of just under $30,000 a year.
So again, that's the numbers that we're looking at in the $8.2 billion budget that's before the Senate right now. I know it was kind of a long clip there, but that really breaks down the hard numbers in the budget. And right now, again, like we're talking on the Senate floor, lawmakers talking about provisos to the budget. These are some critiques to the budget, nothing substantial to the major funding aspects of the budget, but rather some attempts to kind of push some legislative agendas as well as critique and fine-tune the budget. So I'm going to give you a full recap of what they do today and what they've done this week with these provisos on Thursday when you join us again at 7 p.m. To kind of give you a whole breakdown of what we saw the Senate do this week. Because again, they expect to pass the budget, give the budget final vote tonight, hopefully, as they can accept no new amendments. They cut off how many new amendments you can propose to the budget. So any budget amendments that are already on the desk, they're taken up right now, but no new ones can go forward at this point. So we're going to see how many more are left today and what the Senate ends up doing tonight. So stick with SCE TV tomorrow and again throughout the legislative session as we wind down towards May 10th, the last day of session, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7 p.m. on ETV's Facebook page, our YouTube page, and my Twitter account at Gavin Jackson. You can also check out the State House Daybook at scetv.org every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to find out what legislative meetings are happening, what the governor's up to, where things are going today, and also stay in touch with the headlines of the day, the top State House news headlines that we also post there. So everything's all in one place. We make it nice and easy so you know what's going on, when and where up here at the State House. Also, check out the South Carolina Lead podcast, in which I sit down with the top state reporters, political reporters, to talk about the news of the day and go beyond the headlines and get some more context and some insight on these top issues as they're happening. You can subscribe to the South Carolina Lead, spelled L-E-D-E, by searching your Apple Podcast app and also going to your Google Play apps and checking out Stitcher or where else you find podcasts. So plenty for you to do to keep updated on what's going on up here at the State House, as well as State House Week, which every Friday airs on South Carolina Public Radio. You can hear that every Friday with Russ McKinney on South Carolina Public Radio, as well as This Week in South Carolina with Charles Beerbarrow, which is 7:30 p.m. on SCE TV stations every Friday, 7:30 p.m. on SCE TV. I'm Gavin Jackson for SCE TV at the State House in Columbia.